So it is my pleasure to welcome our speakers for this evening. All of them have served as missionaries, and we are thrilled they are here to share their rich and diverse experiences with us. Each of them will introduce themselves, where they served and when, and then we will have some additional discussion with some questions from me, and then we'll open up the conversation to our audience. So please join me in welcoming Jeanette Beagley, Kathleen Beal, Judy Estell, and Sarah Unzicker. Let me turn that off. There. All right. So, as I said, I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves, share your name, how long you were in service, and where you served. So, why don't we start on the end?
Hi, I'm Judy Estell. I'm originally from Falmouth, up north near Kathleen. I served in Taiwan from 1971 to 2013, so 42 years I was there.
I think I'll probably go on record as being the least number of years. I'm Jeanette Beagley Koolhaas. I grew up in the Netherlands and we immigrated to California. And from there I went to all over the place, but I ended up going to Taiwan as a volunteer in 1978, and again in 1979 and 1983 I went full-time for 10 years. And I also served in Taiwan, but on the other side of the island.
And mine was the better side.
We won't discuss that. It was pretty on that side, but it was hard to get to.
I'm Kathleen Beal. I thought that I would be the least numbers because I didn't get into the missionary title until I was after 50. And so I'd lived a whole life of writing and teaching English as a second language long before I was titled as a missionary. That doesn't mean I wasn't a missionary. You're going to get that sermon from me later. But I was in Singapore for 2 years and then came back as a Peace with Justice educator in the United States for 2.5 years, and then went to Seoul, South Korea for another 5.
I'm Sarah McLean Unzicker. I grew up in Franklin, Indiana, and I served in Japan from 1963 until 1993, 30 years.
I'm just going to double check everyone can hear okay? All right, let us know if you can't, so don't wait till the end, because that doesn't help. All right, so Kathleen, you kind of mentioned you came to missionary work a little late, but how was it that you really got started doing this kind of missionary work? And you can tell us, the whole story. Give us the sermon.
The sermon would start with the fact that my husband Phil and I talked for a long time about doing missionary work after we retired. And when we were in our 40s, we were in Haiti on a volunteer and mission project. And when we came back, we thought we should take seriously this calling we felt that when we retired, we would do missionary work. So we started the application process with the United Methodist Church, which was very arduous. It took us a long time. We had to write references and our philosophy of this and of that, etc.
Kathy? Yes, ma'am. Hold it, okay?
Okay. So when we had completed that, we said, put us in the file. Our mission board was in New York. Put us in the file and call us in 10 years when we've retired. So during that time, we were mission commissioned with the mission commission at the United Methodist Church here in Holland. And 1 year we had, the theme, Even Me a Missionary. And an art prof from Hope College did a banner that had, it was lovely, that said Even Me a Missionary on it. And every so often it was brought into the sanctuary. And we would talk about how you are a missionary wherever you are, whoever you are, however old you are, whatever your socioeconomic status is, whatever your education is, you're a missionary. So you're sitting there looking at us, thinking we're missionaries. I'm sitting here looking at you, thinking you are missionaries. That's my sermon. Even be a missionary. So after we did this application with the Methodist Church and asked to be set back in the file, God never works quite the way we think God will, or maybe not at all. And so rather than 10 years, it was a couple months. And they called us from New York and said, would you consider Singapore? Now, I have to confess that we didn't have Google then, and I went to the library to find out where Singapore is located. And when we had our interview with the Methodist board, they had said, is there any place you'd like to go? And I said, well, I'm studying Spanish. Central America might be nice. And I don't do well with cold weather. And so, do you know where Singapore is? 1 degree from the equator. So I'm sure that God was laughing humorously. So that is how I got to Singapore first. Then came back and did Peace with Justice, which is another night of talking, and then went back to Seoul, Korea for another 5. Okay.
Sarah, you want to share a little bit? How you got into this? How you got into all this? Yes.
How I got into this. Well, a little bit differently. I grew up in an American Baptist church out in the country near Franklin, Indiana, and through, can you hear me? Through Baptist camps. Somebody's saying no. Can you hear me now? Anyway, through Baptist camps and missionary speakers and so forth, I kind of thought about being a missionary for a long time, but I really wanted to be a nurse, and so I went through nurses training, and then moved out to Casper, Wyoming with a friend just for an adventure. And the minister there was very, I wouldn't say pushy, but he encouraged missions a lot. And so my friend ended up going to Alaska to one of the American Baptist hospitals there, and I applied and was commissioned by the American Baptist to go to India as a missionary nurse. And so that was great. I was all set, but then they sent me to New Jersey. And there was an ecumenical session there to learn a little bit about linguistics. Not a language, but just to learn about learning a language. And there I met Unzicker. And he was all ready to go to Japan with the Reformed Church in America. And so I wound up going to Japan. Which, in the long run, I think was great. As a matter of fact, that hospital where I was going was closed because of political reasons very soon. But anyway, so we wound up in Japan, 2 years in Tokyo, and then to Hokkaido, Japan, which is absolutely a wonderful, wonderful place.
Jeanette?
Well, there's several things. I wanted to be a teacher, so I was teaching, and there were several things I did not want to do. One was be a missionary. 2 was marry a minister. And the thought of being a minister never occurred to me because I was a woman. So I taught, but teachers have summers off, and I would travel and I would do various things, study. And this one summer I just didn't have anything going, and so my father and the associate minister of my church in California said, hey, we think you ought to apply to go teach English in Taiwan. That's harmless. They told me I was too old, so I couldn't go. So a month later, I got this phone call, and they said, somebody has canceled. Will you like to go? And I said, sure, I'll go. My thought was, hey, I get to see Taiwan, and at the end of the trip, we were going to Japan, and I was quite excited about traveling. So on the airplane, when you land in a new country, you have to fill out this form. And I remember there had been some arguments, because in the process of all of this, it was an off and on situation. And I said, okay, I can't remember. Am I supposed to say I'm a teacher or a missionary? And they said, oh no, we are missionaries. And I just went, Oh no. What happened here? That summer changed my life. I love teaching, I enjoyed Taiwan, and it's no wonder I went back several times after that.
I knew when I was a little girl attending church in Falmouth, the Reformed church there, that I was going to be a missionary teacher. My great fear was becoming an old maid missionary teacher. But as you know, I did not become that. But yes, I knew as a young girl when I heard a missionary speaking that yes, that's where God was calling me, to be a teacher, to be a missionary. I did not plan to go to Taiwan. I always felt God was calling me to Africa, and that's where I was headed. But it's a long story, but my roommate's father at Hope College was the director for the missions of Far East Gospel Crusade. And he kept saying to me, join us, join us. I said, no way, Phil, because I do not want to have to go raise my own money support. Well, it turned out he said, okay, how about going to a school to teach American children, missionary children? I said, no, I'm not going to do that either. And he said, well, you pray about it. Well, when the director of the mission asks you to pray, can you say no? No, it's not a good idea. I said, okay, I will pray. Well, in that time, that period of a week or two, everything I looked at, made in Taiwan, made in Taiwan, made in Taiwan, made in Taiwan. I said, okay, Lord, I will fill out the application. Not happily, but I did. Okay, so went in, so the next thing I knew, they said, okay, the superintendent from Morrison Academy, down there they had to look up the map to find where the country was. I did too, because I didn't know where Taiwan was either. But anyway, I said, okay, I'll meet him. But you know what? God gave us the greatest snowstorm there was on that Saturday morning. There was no way I could get from Falmouth to Lansing. I thought, thank you, Lord, I don't need to go, right? Not right. Because I got a phone call from California, not knowing a soul in California, and said, Judy, we'd like to offer you a 5-year position with Morrison Academy in a satellite school. Satellite school. They said, you're a country girl, so we know you don't need to be entertained a long time, and the evenings are quiet, you can just find your own things to do. I said, guess so. Anyway, I ended up in Taiwan. Then why did I stay so long? Because there I met my widower husband, who had 4 boys, so I became an instant family, and then we had 3 girls, and so I had a beautiful opportunity to stay there and be involved in Taiwan. Haven't even been to Africa yet.
Okay, so I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about what were some of your fondest memories and some of your greatest challenges.
Okay. Well, definitely the greatest challenge was learning Japanese. No doubt about it. I mean, you've all seen how it's written. I always wondered why they couldn't learn Chinese cooking and English writing instead of, Japanese writing, but it didn't work out that way. The language, just spoken language, I could manage pretty well. But anyway, we did have 2 years of language school in Japan. Memorable occasions, well, we had 3 children who were in there, which was pretty exciting, especially the second one when nobody spoke English there. But anyway, that was okay, and they all grew up and loved where we were living, and I think we did a pretty good job. Anyway, memorable occasions, did you ask that? There's so many. I think one I remember especially, people come to church in Japan for a long time often before they decide to make a decision to be baptized. There are a lot of reasons for that. Society is one. They may not always fit into their community or their business if they become a Christian. Family obligations are huge in Japan with ancestral, not worship, but taking care of ancestor altars and so forth. And if you're a Christian, you keep that altar in your house. What do you do with it? And there are just so many problems associated with becoming a Christian. So we had one member of our church, a woman who was in her, well, I guess she was in her 70s when we met her. She had become a Christian several years before. Her husband was a retired teacher. This is one of the odd things about living in a foreign country. You know, you go and you think, oh, everybody looks alike, or you never saw anybody that looked exactly like that. This man looked exactly like my Uncle Herb. He was a retired teacher. He was bald. He was very kindly. He was just a gentleman, and I just looked at him and thought, there's my Uncle Herb. But anyway, he kept coming to church, but he didn't want to be baptized. And Bill talked to him quite a bit, and he said, I'm too old. He said, I have nothing left to give for the church or to Christ. At 92. Other things, I think, were friends I made. And those were all so special, but I'll let somebody else find out.
Probably the biggest challenge that I would draw upon is in Seoul. We taught, we obviously, as my husband Phil, and we had the same job, desk to desk, in Seoul, in a girls' foreign language high school. And they were students that were the top of the notch. And they were heading towards being diplomats and interpreters, and they wanted them to speak English as well as possible. So I had 300 students every semester that I had to grade and rank. That was like deciding whether you speak English better than me, and to care for. So that was I never worked so hard in my life, but it was really worth it. One of my favorite memories is comes in different chapters. I already told you that I was 50 before this started, so we had adult children, and children are supposed to leave their parents, right? But parents aren't supposed to leave their children, and we did it twice. And that was really hard. I'm not kidding. But we could never have dreamed what God was going to put together for all of us. And they came to see us in both countries more than once, and helped with ministry. Came to our classes, talked to our students, did music with our students in a variety of places. Even a couple of our grandchildren came once when they were little, and now they're adults. So those are our memories that I wouldn't change for anything, even though we did pay a price initially.
She's going to give it to me first. When I read the question, what's one of the more memorable experiences, the first thing that came to mind is I got married when we were there. And, people get married, so it's a marriage ceremony with 4 languages. That was interesting. Yes, learning a language in a new culture was memorable, but by this time I had already was speaking a couple of languages, and I had learned Spanish, so this was my 4th language. And I learned that I could learn languages, so that's fine. And then there was all those classroom experiences, but I have to tell you one story. And when I taught at the high school, my classes were 50, 60 students. Only I had 10 classes, so I saw an average of every week 700 students. Yeah, that's a lot of students. And the first few years they didn't like me there because I made too much noise. Well, I don't know how you teach English unless you make noise. You got to talk. And I found all sorts of ways to do that. And so the other teachers were complaining. So finally they put me up above the chapel, and there was a language lab, and so I could play tapes and we could make all the noise we wanted to. Well, there was one particular class of about 50 boys, and they were mostly football players, and they all came from mountain villages. And they were not at all interested in learning English. But, you do your best you can, and it was only once a week, and I lived with it. But I did find out that they liked to sing. Well, I myself learned a lot of Chinese by singing, and so I would find songs to sing. Well, one particular bad day, it must have been at the end of the week or something, I put on the song and they had the words and they're going to sing. But this time I decided to take my headphones off and to listen to them. And this is what they sang to me. I just called to say I love you. I just called to say how much I care. I just called to say how much I loved you. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. And those boys had no idea. I walked out of the class with a smile on my face. And it was beautiful singing, I have to say. There's plenty of other stories. There's the other story of when I was still learning Chinese and teaching all these wonderful girls, and I was so proud of myself. I was going to go into class and show them that I was learning Chinese. And so at the end of the class, I was going to tell them, students, you are dismissed. Only I didn't say that. I mispronounced the word for students, and I had no idea what I said, and they all just roared. And they laughed. I just walked out of class and went to my motorcycle and said, I'm sorry. But I found out later on, they said, you know, you left the class. You told us the spoons were dismissed. But it gave us all courage to keep learning English. And I thought, wow. And that's so true. If you learn to laugh at yourself, if you learn to make mistakes, you can learn. But anyway, that was another one of those wonderful experiences. But when I think about the most memorable experiences, I've brought a sample of it. And this is a keychain that I carry with me. And in 2015, we were invited back as retired missionaries for a special occasion of the 150th anniversary of the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan. And this was a gift from a man who influenced me greatly. He and his wife were by now in their 80s, would you say? And they had written in English this wonderful little card to say, each of us missionaries, thank you. And this is a map of Taiwan. And Dr. Al greatly influenced many of us for his life and his dedication to the church and his years in prison, because the church in Taiwan really cared about the people. And they cared for what was going on and the human rights. I'm sure all of you have heard the word Taiwan in the last few months. I'm not going to go into the politics. That's way farther than you can deal with. But he cared, and he was willing to go to prison for the human rights of the people. And one day I was in a taxi, and the taxi driver discovered I spoke Chinese, so of course he didn't talk to me. And I told him, no, I teach English. And he says, oh, then you're one of those rich people. You make lots of money here. And I said, what? I said, I'm not making a lot of money here. I just teach in a school. I'm, like a regular teacher. He says, don't you teach at one of those cram schools? Those schools at night that make lots of money. I see lots of people coming through to learn to make money. I said, not me. He says, well, then you must be a missionary. I said, yeah, you're right. Or I told him what school I went to. I don't know how the conversation went. I told him what school I was. It was a well-known school. And he said, well, you must be a missionary. And I said, yes, I'm a missionary with the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan. And I was thankful he kept his eye on this road, but he also turned around and gave me the thumbs up. He says, that's the church that cares for the people of Taiwan.
Pastor Gao was the president of the seminary where we taught before I reached there, so we know them very well. They're just very, very special friends. When I think of one of the hardships of being a missionary in Taiwan, it was when I knew that when the children reached 6th or 7th grade, that they would have to go to boarding school. And this was very, very difficult. We used the indoctrination method for them when they were very little. We'd say, when you get to be big, you get to go to the boarding school. And we tried to have it up, but your mother and father's hearts were just breaking when you saw them go. We were very thankful that we could see them about every 6 to 8 weeks. weeks. And either they came home or we went there. And we're very thankful for that. Prior to that, the children attended Mennonite school right in town with us. We had a back wall that we shared, and so we're very, very thankful for that. So people talk about the difficulties with teenagers and high schoolers and all the middle schoolers and all this kind of things. I honestly don't know a whole lot about that, even though I had 7 children go through the system, because they were not in our home so much, and we were always so excited to see them when they came home, and just had such a blessed time together with them. We're just really, really thankful. We're thankful for dorm parents, Christian dorm parents, who just really followed and believed as we did how important it was for our children to grow in their faith and understanding as well as academically. So we're just very, very thankful for them. But it was difficult, and this mother cried many tears, and it required a lot of faith sometimes to send those little 6th grade children off to the other side. The island is only 90 miles wide, so you think, no big deal, huh? Well, we got the mountain range going right straight through the middle of it. So to get over there, we had to go up and around and through and around, and you know, the tunnels and everything else to get there. Eventually, we had a train that took us about 6 hours, 7 hours. But to go across the island, it could take us 6, 8, 10, 12, sometimes 14, 16 hours, because once in a while the buses would get caught. No, they'd get in a tunnel, and neither one wanted to give right away. So they'd get out, and the drivers would argue for a long time, and we're all sitting there patiently, impatiently, waiting for them to decide, and finally someone would decide that they would back up. But you realize, here's the mountain, here's the road, and there's the edge. So we've got to somehow do this all too. So we did a lot of praying. Talking about faith, I would like to share one experience. I think that took a lot of faith also on my part. As you know, there are many Buddhists on the island, and of course they do not want to kill anything. And so many times they would gather snakes, and we do have a number of poisonous snakes on the island. They would gather the snakes if they saw them and bring them to the Buddhist temple. Well, we knew that it was an auspicious day at that time, because we saw the Buddhists going, how come it's me?
I don't know. I don't know. It's usually me, so go ahead. You're fine.
We saw the Buddhists going with a lot of cages and things up on the other side of the mountain. Now, we as a seminary were nestled up the mountains here. Here's a road, beautiful lake, and then the mountains go up over there. So we saw the Buddhists go over there with their gowns and monks, the whole works were there. Well, we didn't learn until later that they had released 999 snakes, and most of them were poisonous. The theory was they were supposed to go up the mountain, but some of them didn't get the memo, and they decided to come across the lake, and we could see them swimming across the lake. So we put lime powder everywhere with hopes that they would crawl over that and then they'd shrivel up and die. That was, in theory, what was supposed to happen. But how many days did I go into my classroom on 2nd or 3rd floor? We had walkways so they could get across the walkway just like we did from the side of the mountain to the building. Look at my chalk tray, and there would be the skin of a snake. To have a skin, that means there's been a snake, right? Doesn't take a whole lot of brains. Those rooms had Stell word as to where those snakes were, but we had the chapel on 3rd floor, and an organ that a student was learning to play. And coming, they went there one night to practice. And as he pushed the foot pedal down, the snake came up and got him. So the next thing we heard, he was in the hospital. Now, the instructions we received, if you were bitten by a snake, catch the snake. So you know what kind it is. Is it the kind that's going to attack the muscles, or is it the kind that's going to attack the nervous system? Then you receive the medication for the antivenom for that. Well, maybe there wasn't a bug to catch the snake, and I don't blame him, I wouldn't either. So the nurse called and said, we really need to pray because it's been a long time. We don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know what kind it is. Meanwhile, the doctors were calling all the doctors around the island, and what should we give them? We don't know what has bitten them, but we know it's a poisonous one. So they gave him one antivenom, waited and waited. We're all praying. We contacted the missionaries to pray. Please spare Minga's life. waited and waited. And at midnight they called again and said, he's still here, but he's not any better. So they said, okay, give him the next one. I mean, he's going to die anyway. We'll see if this works. Praise the Lord, he came through it. Actually, it took him months for his leg to get back to normal so that he could even do the foot pedals because it was so damaged, his whole nerve system. But he ended up going to Germany to study there, so that's just beautiful. I have to share one instance that was just really exciting. I was able to teach English Bible in a maximum security prison. And the gentlemen that I had, and boys, some of them were, in my class were either junior high or senior high students because they never finished before. They knew I was going to teach English Bible, but they volunteered to come in the noon hour, even giving up in the wintertime the one warm bath they would receive a week. They were willing to give that up to come to English Bible class. They knew Jesus and God as swear words from the wonderful movies that they had heard from America. And that's all they knew. But what a joy, and it was so exciting when one of the guys came up and he said, Judy, I really believe in Jesus Christ now. He is my Lord and he's my Savior. You've talked about baptism, because they knew nothing about the Bible. We started with the very basics. I want to be baptized. Can I be baptized here? Well, we didn't know. And the prison allowed for him to be baptized. What an exciting moment that was. And so we asked him to share his testimony. They didn't know what testimony was. Had no idea. He stood up and he was just shaking in his boots. And he said, I believe in Jesus. And I am going to heaven when I die, and I'm going to see teacher there when she dies. We're both still alive.
Okay, well, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions from the audience. And I do want to ask, are there other missionaries in the audience? And I know Ellie's over there. So there's a few, quite a few. Okay. Well, thank you all for being with us. So I'm sure you all have other questions and comments to share. So please do. Feel free to do that as we ask questions of our speakers. And so if anyone does have a question.
While they're thinking,
Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to mention the difference between Japanese and Chinese people.
Absolutely.
Because Jeanette mentioned how the kids all laughed when she made the mistake. I made plenty of mistakes in Japan. One Sunday, right after Christmas, I was asked to teach the Sunday school class kind of off the cuff because the minister was busy. So I thought, well, I can do the story of the three wise men. I know that in Japanese. Unfortunately, I forgot the word for magi, for the three wise men, and so I kept saying the word for three stuffed animals. Never had to smile. And afterwards, I realized what I'd done, and I was like, oh. Also, I wasn't a teacher, but I did teach English and English Bible, but I had nothing like these women did with these big classes. It was amazing.
Can I say something? May I say something to, I wish I had included this in the things that I remember. You may wonder, do we have communication with these students now? Absolutely. I still have boxes of letters from the past, but still hear from them now. And in July, one of my sons had a wedding reception, and a former student came from Singapore, and then one came from Seoul via Toronto, and she brought her family. She has just received her PhD in Toronto and brought her family, and the 12-year-old is named Philip, and so he's named after my Phil. So one of the things we did over that weekend is we went to the cemetery and sat in the grass and told Phil stories. And so now that 12-year-old knows somewhat about the person who is his namesake. That meant nothing to him before that. So it doesn't stop just because we came across the ocean. The relationships still continue. And I wanted to say one thing.
my time. This is really just just a little bit more than a decade of my life, so it's really a small segment. But when we retired, officially, Phil said it was 25 years too short, and I would agree with that.
Well, can I say something more? I know that a lot of you have heard us talk about teaching English, and you wonder, how important is that? But there was not many English speakers, and they needed help. But over the years, these people, you really can't go in and teach English and talk about the Bible unless you were doing a Bible study. But you could be a good English teacher. And one of the things Dr. Gow told me one day, he says, "Now, where are you and what are you doing?" I said, "I'm an English teacher." He says, "Go be the best English teacher you can." And so I hear about it. But after years, I went to a church one time. My coworker, my Taiwanese coworker, was the minister there, and I heard a voice. And he says, "Do you recognize that voice?" I said, "Yeah, I recognize that voice. That's whatever his name was. I couldn't remember." And he said, "He is being baptized today." I said, "Really?" There's been 3 or 4 English teachers who had volunteered over the years that had taught this man. He says, "But he's not being just baptized, his whole family is." And it was amazing. I forgot what else I was going to say. I'll remember something. Oh, I know what I was going to say, and that is, many times you think, well, how different is it? And what did I learn? I agree with her. The time was too short, but, I feel as much of a missionary before I went to Taiwan as afterwards. And yes, I've worked at Western with international students, but now that we have Afghan refugees, and we've worked with them, and now I'm working with asylum seekers from Nicaragua and Mexico. And this week somebody had a hospital bill, and I called the hospital and I said, "Okay, what are we going to do?" And it didn't take much, but I realized that person could not make that call. It required one of us to do it. And our whole lives we can be missionaries no matter where we are and what we do.
I don't know if you're going to ask this question, Michelle, but you did have approach us with it earlier, how missions have changed. And obviously they changed a great deal from the time that Judy was there, and we're probably about the same age, from the time that I was there. But there's so many young people that are doing things now that I saw an article in the Sentinel last spring about a young woman in Grand Rapids who was serving. She was called a missionary. I'm not sure. I think possibly she was with a Baptist church, and she was working in a fruit distribution center. And I thought, amen, they should be the ones that are sitting up here talking about missions. And there's a young woman that has just come to Holland, back to Holland, who was in Oaxaca and in Baja for 7 years, and now she's going to settle here, and she's only 28 years old. So missions are alive and well, but I think they have a different definition now, and God's still working in lots of different ways.
I have to tell you another story, and I have to give a shout out to somebody. But many of you who have worked or go to the Reformed Church. Reformed Church and Missionaries going to Chiapas, Mexico for many, many years. And today you have a missionary who is one of the people who didn't become a Christian. His family is very influenced by that. He's a Mayan Christian from Chiapas, and he's now a missionary here in Holland, Michigan. We've become the mission field.
All right, I did see a question.
I'm going to borrow this.
So, a question on the reverse side. All of you have spent a lot of time in Taiwan, Japan, Singapore. What was it like to come back And let me narrow it down, because that's a long story for each of you. What's the biggest challenge you had coming back to the States after acclimatizing yourself to another culture and becoming part of another culture for so many years?
You know, it worked more than one way for me, because I had grown up in the Netherlands and came here as an immigrant, and that was a very difficult adjustment. It took me for many, many years before I came on top of that. When I went to Taiwan, all of a sudden there was a freedom there to be in another country, and I understood that. But when I came back to the United States, I reverted back to that immigrant child, and it was very difficult. And reverse culture shock is just, it's not easy. Let me tell you, it's not easy. I don't know how else to say it. It's a very difficult thing. And here's an example. People will say, oh, you've lived in Taiwan. So what was it like in Thailand? We learned not to talk about it. I know John well enough. And we love to sit and talk because we can talk about missions. We talk about what it was like overseas, but the average American doesn't know. You know, you say things and they kind of go, oh, wow, it's that cold in Taiwan? Well, yeah, but not like it's in Holland, Michigan. They just have no context. And it's a very difficult thing to come back to the U.S.
And you know, I don't know how many times I was asked, well, what was it like? You know, like, how was your vacation? Literally. And then you start to answer and maybe say a sentence or two, and then it's, what'd you think of the Tigers game last week? And you know that you've lost them already. The Tigers game was good last week. I'm glad to hear that. And I learned, you know, how to respond, to tell if they really wanted to learn more, to should we encourage this conversation, or is the Tigers game what the rest of what we're going to talk about? So you kind of figure that out after a while, but it is not easy, right?
It's definitely not easy. And the hardest thing for myself was going to the store. Why do you need 50,000 brands of toothpaste and it goes everything? Why can't we just have one tube of toothpaste and we all use it and all be happy? How many times did I come back to the States, go to the store with my list, and leave the store with nothing? I couldn't cope with all the choices you had. And you have no appreciation. I guess I still don't care for all the choices we have here. Talking about people not knowing how to answer, of all the people that I have met in all my travels and visiting churches, up north we have a number of Amish communities, and one of them have a store. At 8 years old, a little Amish boy came to me and asked me questions like you wouldn't believe. He knew where I was, why I was, where I was, and I said, oh my, I wish that the adults that I have met all through these years would know how to ask questions. And he listened. Finally, his dad said, time to get busy after a half hour. Mrs. Stell has to go. And so asking the right questions and having people listen. Many don't listen, it goes right over their heads.
Thank you for asking that question, and thank you for coming. Thank you for caring enough to hear about these stories that are actually ancient history in the kind of the way we live now. And it's like you really do care. You really did want to hear the rest of the story. There is more to life than the Tigers. I can really identify with all the things they've mentioned here. One thing that helped us as we returned home was so many good friends here in Holland, because we had spent our furloughs here, and there are a lot of retired Japanese missionaries here. That was a big help. A thing that surprised people, though, you know, they think of Japan, they know Tokyo and Yokohama, and we showed our pictures, and our average snowfall where we lived in Hokkaido was was 20 feet a year. And they'd look at all those pictures and they'd think, well, that's not Japan. Well, yeah, it was Japan. It was our driveway, 20 feet. And I've always said the reason we retired was the driveway was 40 feet long. Bill was getting a little old, and the snowblower gave out.
A question over here. I'm going to pass it this way.
Thank you again so much for all of you being here, sacrificing your time for us. What would you say was the most profound spiritual life lesson that God taught you? And then also, how did you prepare for becoming a missionary? Thank you.
I'll answer the question. I had some good mentors and Taiwanese people who taught me what it meant to be a missionary. Because and I worked with many volunteers too, and they'd come and say, oh, we're going to come here and help the people. And I'd say, slow down. You're coming here to learn from these people. And I think that's a lesson we all need to learn. And yes, I ended up going to seminary. I became an ordained minister. But you have to listen. And you have to learn to listen to people.
How did we prepare to be a missionary? I think it's what all of you did in your own homes, in your own churches. Bible stories, Sunday school, catechism, reading the Bible, establishing a firm foundation of devotion to yourself so that you didn't need to depend on anyone else, but you were just you and the Lord every day. That was a profound way to prepare for mission fields, because when you first go out there, you don't know a word of the language. No English churches in the community where I served, and so it was a local church. And what was the first strong spiritual impression was I attended church, didn't understand anything. The only word I knew was Jesus in Chinese. But we had a communion service, and it just hit me like a bolt of lightning. Wow, this is all the same. We're worshiping the same God in the same way, breaking bread and drinking the juice together. And it's a bond of Christian fellowship, regardless of the language. And that just hit me just really hard the first couple weeks after being there.
I'll say amen to that. It was that in the Lord's Prayer.
One thing I will never forget is we were probably in Singapore a couple of weeks, and the U.S. went into, I think it was Panama. Does that make sense? Like around the late 80s? And there was a headline in the Singapore news that said, "Might does not make right." And I learned a lesson then that I will never forget. And that in part of that also was that the United States is not the center of the world. And a lot of people think it is. And all you need to do is travel a little bit and find out there's a lot of world out there, and God loves everybody. And the spiritual part, the thing that comes to me is I think I learned more from my students than they did from me. There were so many encounters and so many exchanges and so many conversations. And I had, 10 minutes between classes? So you had to, regroup. And I remember running from my classroom to my office and back again, and a student running with me, and she said, "Do you worry about me?" She's one of 300. Sure, of course I did, because I knew she wasn't a Christian. And she's actually now like part of our family. She ended up getting a PhD at the U of M, married a man there, and she's professor in Seoul now. But the reason she asked me if I was worried about her was because she said, because I'm not a Christian. Of course, that demanded more than just 5 minutes between class, and we did have time for that. But I just, I don't know, I guess it's not really easy to share with you how much you care about the people that you're working with, and how much you feel like God put you there, and you're there to live with them in Christ's love.
I think one of the most valuable lessons I learned was community. We attended the children and I went to a very small church. Bill was preaching almost every Sunday in another church. He preached in Japanese, but we became part of that small church. And we talked about small churches in the States, but this is like, 10 people, 20 people there. One of our country churches, sometimes it would be Bill and I and maybe 2 other people. I mean, they're little churches. But especially with women, I became so close to, as I said, I was a nurse, so I wasn't, prepared to teach or do anything special. I'm not a minister. So I just became part of what we call the Fujinkai, which would here be the ladies' aid or whatever. We cleaned the church together. We cooked lunches together on Sundays. But most of those women were not married to Christians. And so learning about their lives, their own spiritual lives, how much they appreciated our Christian community was so very important to them. And then the other community was our missionary community. We were the only Americans in a town of 180,000. But throughout Hokkaido, there were a lot of missionaries, Mennonites, Free Will Baptists, Lutherans, Reformed, can't remember what else. But twice a year we got together. And that's a widespread of beliefs in the Christian faith. But it was a wonderful community, and it made us, I think we all learned so much from one another, and knowing our faith in God and Jesus Christ as our Savior is the thing that unites us, and it doesn't matter what separates us.
I think we have time for, it's 8 o'clock now, so I don't want to go too late, but time for one more question.
This isn't really a question, but I'm a missionary that just came on furlough, and I was really excited to see how many missionaries are here. And I would love to hear more of your stories. And I was wondering if maybe we could kind of make a community of missionaries and maybe have time to talk to one another with people who get it. So if you'd be interested, just meet me over here. We can exchange contact info.
Michelle, do we have time to have each person that raised their hand say where they were, who they are, and where they were?
Yeah, I would think so. So, all of you who raised your hands that you were a missionary. So, okay, I'm going to start back here in the corner. So just to say who you are and where you served and when.
Wendell and Renska Carson served in Asia for 25 years, and I recruited that lady on the end for my program in Taiwan, and then after I helped to bury Bill Estell's first wife, and then we all conspired to get her to marry Bill.
Okay, others on this side of the room here before I go over to the other side of the room.
Shar Alexander and my husband Dave. And we were also in Taiwan for about 38 years.
Okay, yes, back here.
Kelly Anderson and my husband Mike. We've served in Brazil for 16 years.
Wonderful. Okay. Did I get everyone on this side of the room before I move to the other side of the room?
We got my husband there.
Yes.
Ellie Norton, and I served 38 years in Japan.
George and Kathleen Hunsberger. We did our long-term missionary work in East Africa, living in Kenya, working with Ugandan refugees for 1 year. It felt like more than one.
Well, maybe you can explain the rest of it. He taught missions or at Western Theological Seminary.
So we're John and Lynn Hubers. We were in the Middle East for 13 years, in Bahrain and Oman, for a year in Egypt. Also, I was in charge of the Reformed Church mission in the Middle East and South Asia for 5 years. Got my PhD in missions and taught at Northwestern College in North City for 10 years. So my whole life has been missions, and we also are currently working on a project in Ethiopia.
Bill Unzicker, I was in Japan with Sarah.
Anyone else? Did I miss anyone? Yes.
My name is Janel Lopez. I'm the niece of Jeanette, and when I was a little girl, the first woman that I ever saw ascend to a pulpit was her making mission presentations, and I was honored to serve in Chiapas, Mexico for 3 years, where I met my husband, and Angel, and he can tell you how he is involved in missions.
My name is Angel Lopez. I'm from Chiapas, Mexico, and I just became this year formally a missionary of the Reformed Church in America Global Mission, and I'm a site director at the YWCA Mexico border in Ciudad Juarez, across from El Paso, Texas. So, and I'm one of the members, one of the pastors at the Reformed Church here in Holland, Michigan.
I'm Kathleen Beagley. Jeanette and I were students together in California, and I was here at the time.
And it wouldn't be right to not introduce our daughter Lorena, who is here with us. So.
And as I look over this crowd, there's a few more people that are not missionaries but are related to missionaries.
If you're brave. Otherwise, want to get to if any other questions for our wonderful panel. Okay. Otherwise, we will say thank you. Thank you so much for being here this evening and sharing all of these wonderful stories with us and for your service. And thank you all for being here this evening, and we hope to see you again at the Holland Museum. So come back and visit us again. So, but thank you again. Let's give them a round of applause. All right. And thank you all and have a good evening.